Well, good evening and welcome to Yada Yahweh. I'm joined here by both Kirk and JB. We're coming out of an interesting week. This time last week, the President of the United States had decided to assassinate the second highest ranking leader in Iran. And we had talked about the fact that it would have significant and unsuspected consequences, and that ultimately it was an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do, because it's rather obvious that the way that the Syrian war is playing out, that we now have pitted China and Russia together with Shia Islam, that would be Iran, Syria, and they are opposed by the United States and Europe and Saudi Arabia representing Sunni Islam, and that's going to be the basis for World War III. Well, there are a couple of things that have transpired since that assassination, which has made the world deadlier and more susceptible to this war. I know that that Republicans are making it a heresy, to suggest that there was a connection between the missile attack that brought down the Kuwaiti aircraft in Iran. But the fact is, the Iranians were not about bringing down civilian aircraft. And the day after the assassination, they fired a missile. Or not a day after, but within the week of the assassination, after threatening reprisals, they shot a missile and downed a civilian aircraft, killing almost 200 people. To suggest that there's no connection between the two is to render oneself irrational, so that you cannot make connections. Now, it's also interesting that it's a Ukrainian aircraft. The Ukraine is the place that has really separated and created the world hostility that will end up in world war between the United States and Russia. Not because of what Russia did, but because of what America did and then blamed Russia for having done with not only the Ukraine, but with Crimea. And it's also interesting that a disproportionate number of the passengers on that plane were Canadian. In Canada today, there's news of a reporter calling the leader that Trump assassinated a terrorist. And the officer responsible at the scene said, if you call him a terrorist again, I'll have you arrested. And the reporter said, so you're telling me I couldn't even call Osama bin Laden a terrorist? He says, if you mention that word again, I'll have you arrested. So there's clearly a connection between these things. Now, before we move to the second aspect of this that makes the world so much more deadly, and America's inability to perceive anything in context, Iran yesterday declared that America was the leading terrorist nation on earth. And what's really interesting is that, America would just scoff at it and say, oh, no, the Iranians are terrorists. The Iranians have terrorist institutions. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. The definition of terrorism is to deploy weapons such that a civilian population fears for their life, that a civilian population is either harassed, abused, enslaved, incapacitated in some way, killed, just treated brutally, such that others in that civilian population are wont to capitulate to keep the same fate from happening to them. It is not a terrorist act.
Sounds like most U.S. wars.
Yes, correct. And we'll go through that in a moment. But it is not a terrorist act For example, the IRA was called a terrorist organization, but their targets were not civilians. They only targeted military and police units from the UK. It's not a terrorist attack. What the United States did in perpetrating the Civil War to finally win the Civil War was a terrorist tactic. Sherman's March to the Sea, he did not go after military fortifications or military troops. He destroyed civilian food supplies and civilian homes, and he just essentially destroyed everything. Burned the ground. It was, and he knew he was a terrorist. When the United States wanted to end World War II, we stopped attacking as our primary target with our bombers military targets. We decided that we would make the war impossible for the Japanese to continue to fight by turning our attention to civilian centers, and we firebombed Japanese non-combatants, women and children, for 50 nights in a row, burning them alive with our aerial bombs. That is a terrorist tactic. The way the United States perpetrated the Indian-American wars, where we confiscated this continent. These were terrorist tactics. It could be argued that America's war against invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan were exclusively terrorist in their tactics, because America never once attacked or battled military units from Afghanistan or from Iraq. Every engagement was with civilians. So there is considerable merit to the Iranian statement that America is the world's foremost terrorist nation. You know, America spends more money on its military and its spy apparatus, which is united with its military, than the rest of the world combined. I mean, these are facts. We are the world's merchants of death. We sell more weapons of mass destruction than any other nation on earth, more than all other nations combined. Now, the Revolutionary Guards that were managed by the Iranian general, their primary targets were American military bases. They weren't out attacking American civilians. I mean, there really are no independent American civilians in Iraq or Syria. So if you're going to attack an American in Iraq or Syria, you're either attacking an embassy, or you're attacking a military base, or you're attacking a contractor that is working for the military. That's what you're doing. So it's technically impossible for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to perpetrate terrorist acts against America. We're not using the term correctly. And if you can't use words correctly, then you cannot communicate accurately. So, you know, we may not like what's happening in various places and who doing what to whom, but we're no longer using these words accurately, and when we don't, we fail to communicate. Now, the other thing I want to mention about what happened as a consequence of America killing one man. By doing so, the Iranians have foregone all prior commitments on their refinement of uranium and their manufacture of a nuclear bomb. Within a year, Iran will have a nuclear bomb. Now, Iran has made it clear that there's only two targets for their nuclear arsenal as they develop it: Israel and the United States.
Right.
We did not make the world safer. We did not make America safer by killing the highest ranking Iranian. We made the world much, much less safe. So, things to think about as we try to understand the world that's around us. But I would like to conclude the news portion of this program by saying that it became obvious to us as we studied Yahweh's Word that we were witnessing the initiation of World War III, and that the prophecies that we were reading, particularly in Yeshayahu 17 and 18, spoke directly of the United States' role in unleashing the horror that the world is going to witness, and that the next world war will be fought between Sunni and Shia Muslims, with Iran and Saudi Arabia leading the charge on either side, with the United States and Europe aiding and abetting the Sunnis, and Russia and China aiding and abetting the Shias. And all the while, they're going to be a tremendous onslaught within Israel, such that Israel will not have enough bullets or bombs to stop the flood of Islamic terrorists. So that is the reality that we are watching. It is exactly what was predicted, and it's inevitable. All right, that said, I'd like to just double back a little bit as to where we were. We were ridiculing Paul's speech in Acts 13. We had made it to
29.
I think we were. I have us really at 27 and 28.
Okay, I'll go back.
So let me just double back a bit. It says, because if we don't, then we lose context, and context is important. As John was completing his work, he said, "Who do you suppose I am? I am not the one you are looking for, but there is one coming after me whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." We explained how all of that except the last line, which is meaningless, was incorrectly cited. And that the part that was really meaningful, which was that Yahuchanan, the immerser, was citing from Yeshayahu Isaiah 40, which speaks prophetically of Dowd, was extraordinarily meaningful and yet not mentioned by Paul. Fellow children of Abraham and you God-fearing Gentiles, it is to us that this message of salvation has been sent. Well, what message of salvation? That I'm not worthy to untie his sandals? That's the thing that preceded it. That's why I read it. It is to us that this message of salvation has been sent. What is this, a message of finally, we have someone who is worthy to untie sandals? Is that the message? What is the message of salvation? I want to know, because it is to us that this message of salvation has been sent.
He doesn't have to make sense. He's Paul.
But there has been no message of salvation.
No.
Now, also, fellow children of Abraham. God does not refer to Yisrael as the children of Abraham.
No.
He refers to Jacob as the father of Yisrael. Abraham is the father of the covenant. Jacob is the father of Yisrael. Yahweh's message was sent to Yisrael. Therefore, he cited the wrong individual.
Yeah.
Not Abraham. And there's a tremendous difference. You need to understand that Abraham was Babylonian.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Plus.
Israel is not born until Jacob, and it is through Jacob that the children of Israel to whom the message was sent were conceived. And then it says, and you God-fearing Gentiles. God didn't convey this message to Gentiles. He conveyed this message to Israel. If we wish to listen in, we're welcome to do so as Gentiles. But this message was not given to us. Read the Torah. The Torah makes it absolutely clear this message was given to Israel. We Gentiles can listen, we can capitalize, we can become like Israel, we can join Israel, we can participate in the covenant, we can read the Torah. We're not prophets. We are not the chosen people. And God-fearing, oh, that's preposterous. The entire concept of the covenant is Yahweh wants to be our Father. You can't fear your Father. You can't love that which you fear. God-fearing is what Satan wants, not Yahweh. The people of Jerusalem and the rulers did not recognize Jesus. Well, first of all, his name wasn't Jesus. His name wasn't even Isun that Paul wrote. His name was Yahusha. And it isn't true. Many people in Jerusalem did recognize Yahusha. In fact, some of their leaders recognized Yahusha. So it's just a flat-out incorrect statement. This is to suggest that the people of Jerusalem and the rulers, that would be all the people of Jerusalem and all of the rulers didn't recognize. That is not true. As a matter of fact, the group of people were called Ebonai that knew exactly who Yahusha was and what he did. And they were Torah observant, and they despised Paul. Moreover, the disciples, they knew exactly who he was. This is just an outright lie for the purpose of demeaning the chosen people. Yet in condemning them and condemning him, they fulfilled the words of the prophets that are read on every Shabbat. The Jews did not condemn him. Excuse me, they did not condemn him. The Romans did. And Rome morphed into the Roman Catholic Church. If you can't get that straight, how in the hell are you going to understand anything else, Christians? In fact, Paul's next statement contradicts the statement he made. It says, yet in condemning him. The next statement is, though they found no proper ground for a death sentence. Excuse me, which one was it? That they found no proper ground? Or that they condemned him?
God.
Is no one among the entire echelon of Christians capable of being rational? Which one is it, Christians? Did they condemn him or not? What's true? Acts 13:27 or Acts 13:28? Which one's false? Yet in condemning him, they fulfilled the words of the prophets that are read every Sabbath. Well, I can tell you that 13:27 is erroneous because there are no words written anywhere in the prophets that Jews would condemn him. And I can also tell you that the only place where it even mentions that the Pesach lamb, which the Christians didn't recognize, would be offered on the Shabbat isn't read every Shabbat, and it isn't read any Shabbat because it's contained in Yeshaya 53, which the rabbinical community resolutely skips every time they go through the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. So it isn't read on any Shabbat. Even the ancillary comments regarding his sacrifice as the Pesach lamb. And there are no words fulfilling what Paul just said. Not one. How is it, again, that you can be a Christian? You're putting your faith in this man's testimony, and you can't figure out that he's lying to you. Why don't you come up with all the words that were fulfilled in yet condemning him in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, and then demonstrate that such words which don't exist are read every Shabbat. I'll give you as much time as you want, Christian. But please, since you can't come up with an answer, admit the fact that Paul was a habitual and prolific liar. Though they found no proper ground for a death sentence, they asked Pilate to have him executed. Quite to the contrary. They, should we believe the reports that are contained in the Christian New Testament, found a reason for him to receive a death sentence. Do you fellows know what it is?
He spoke the name of Yahweh, I think.
That is correct. He spoke Yahweh's name. He quoted from the Torah, prophets, and Psalms a statement that included Yahweh's name, and he read it to them. Mm-hmm. That was if you look at rabbinic and Sanhedrin law, saying Yahweh's name was a crime punishable by death. So, there you go. They found proper ground for a death sentence. But they weren't in a position where they could execute him. They could not do what Paul and Christianity accuses them of doing because they were controlled by Rome. And in a Roman province, only Rome has the authority for capital punishment. So the opposite of what Paul has claimed here is true. Then it says they asked Pilate to have him executed. Well, if they found no grounds for a death sentence, why would they do that?
Well, I know why they do it, but I don't know what they were thinking in that sentence, but they wouldn't tolerate it for a moment.
Just think for a moment, why would anyone who found no grounds to have someone executed seek to have him executed? I mean, that makes no sense. If you found a ground to have them executed, you might seek to have him executed. If you found no grounds to have him executed, you would not seek to have him executed, right? You'd set him free.
Yeah. Right.
The sentence in itself is contradictory. But what it belies is the condition of the relationship between the Jewish religious leaders in Jerusalem and Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate, Pilate, some would say, was an extraordinarily insensitive dictator. He had made a habit of hanging Roman religious paraphernalia everywhere throughout Jerusalem. And he did it because he liked taunting the Jews. And the Jews were going to his superiors all the way to Rome, saying that it isn't in the Romans' interest to inspire a rebellion. And with this man continuing to act this way and continuing to inflame tensions for no reason, you're going to end up with a revolution. And if there is a riot, an outbreak of violence that he inspires, it's going to cost Roman lives. Blood's going to be spilled. You don't want to use your resources doing that. You need to get him to stop. So they had played the trump card. I mean, that's all you get to do in a dictatorial scheme like this. You go above that man's head to the Romans and saying that he is working in a manner contrary to Rome by
on the list now,
inspiring people to riot against Rome, you don't get to play another card. Rome either takes him out or you're screwed, blued, and tattooed. It's over for you. If these same Jewish leaders had then come to Pilate and said, oh, can you do us a favor? We got this fella here. We didn't find any reason to have him executed, but we would really like you to execute him. Oh, by the way, the people love him. And our concern is because the people love him, we think you need to execute him, and you're just going to do this favor for us. It makes absolutely no sense. Pilate wouldn't entertain anything they had to say. He's not going to give them an audience, and they're not going to go to him. To write this, you'd have to think, you'd have to realize, you'd have to believe that the audience you're writing to is so ignorant and so irrational that they're never going to bother to check sources. They're never going to read, for example, Josephus, as he specifically chronicles and documents the political intrigue that occurred regarding Pilate. He specifies everything that Pilate did to incite a riot and a revolution against Rome. He cites the letter that was written both to the governor of Syria that was above Pilate and to Rome itself. He chronicles the meetings that took place. And the fact is, they almost got him withdrawn. If it hadn't been for intrigue that took place in Rome at this time, where the emperor's interest was distracted, he would have been repealed. So there is no historic context where what Paul just wrote is remotely possible. And that means he lied. And you'd have to say now, why would Paul lie about the Jews finding their God Jesus innocent and then asking Pilate to have him executed? What's the motivation? Because he's clearly lying.
Well, he was taken over. To them, it would be, we're in charge, and we don't want you to be in charge, so therefore kill him. So
Paul's audience was Gentiles. His audience was Romans and Greeks. And therefore, it was essential for Paul to demean the people who hold the goods against him. The Jews knew that Paul was lying. They knew he was a fraud. They knew he was misquoting every time he opened his mouth. They knew he was irrational. They knew their history. They knew the circumstances they were living in. They knew that every word Paul was saying was dishonest. It was a lie. And so Paul wanted them silent.
To the poor ignorant.
Correct. And he realized that once he turned his attention to Gentiles, he could easily play them for fools, and that they would do his bidding and over time hunt down and kill the people who could prove Paul wrong. I mean, thus far in this speech, Paul has made 17 claims which are demonstrably inaccurate and has deliberately lied on 9 occasions. Next it reads, when they had carried out all that was written about him. Now, who is they?
Jews, I would imagine.
Well, it has to be, because it says, so they found no proper ground for a death sentence. That's referring to the Jews. Yes. They asked Pilate, singular, to have him executed. So when they had carried out all that was written about him, has to speak to the Jews. But take a moment here. They couldn't do anything. They took him to Pilate. So they couldn't carry out anything. They didn't carry out the crucifixion. They didn't carry out the Roman flagellation. They didn't do any of it.
Yeah, even if they could, that's not the way they would kill him.
It just stated in the previous statement that they took him to Pilate and asked Pilate to have him executed, so they could not carry out all that was written about him. Now, beyond the fact that they could not have done it and did not do it, and therefore Paul is lying again, what was written about him? You know how many times Yosha's name appears in prophecies?
None. So there's nothing written about
correct.
Him.
Nothing.
Not by name.
There are references to the role he would play as the Pesach lamb. That's found in Yahowah 53. There are references to what he would endure on Pesach. Mizmor 22 and 88. Who wrote Mizmor 22 and 28?
Dowd, of course.
Dowd. So, apart from what Dowd wrote in Mizmor 22 and 28, which says nothing about Jews not recognizing Jesus as God, says nothing about them turning on him and having him executed. But apart from that, there's nothing written about him. All the prophecies that Christians claim to deify their Jesus as if he were God as opposed to the Passover lamb all speak about Dowd. There's 1,000 of them that even mention Dowd's name in the midst of them. And I just translated Micah 5, the one about out of you, Bethlehem. You know, small among the clans of Judah. It doesn't actually say that. It says, it speaks of the last born from Bethlehem. Yosha was the firstborn among his siblings. Dowd was the last born among his. Speaking of Dowd.
Yeah, he was the little guy out in the woods. I mean, out in the field.
It's every place. And so they did not carry out what was written about him. Then it says, they took him down from the cross and laid him in a tomb. He's now speaking of the people who did not recognize him. That's the last context of Jerusalem and the leaders of these Jews. The leaders of the Jews didn't take him down, nor did people that did not recognize him in Jerusalem. This isn't true either.
If nobody recognized him, why would they go to that much trouble? He would have just been a nothing.
Correct.
Not give him a tomb at all. I mean,
no, it doesn't say here, Acts 13:29. It does not say. He fulfilled the role of the Pesach lamb. Yahweh's soul then went into Sheol to fulfill the promise of matzah.
The matzah, yeah.
And then spirit and soul were reunited on Bikurim. It doesn't mention a word of any of it. It simply took him down from the cross and laid him in a tomb, but God raised him from the dead. Not a word. His entire purpose is to be the Pesach lamb. Not a word. Obviously, Paul knew it. He was the number uno student at Jewish school.
Gamaliel.
According to him.
Yeah, Gamaliel. Yeah.
He's misquoting from the Torah, prophets, and Psalms with reckless abandon. You know, he has certainly read Yahowah 53. He absolutely had to know it was on Passover that this occurred. And yet he does not mention Passover. He's talking about a plan of salvation, and he doesn't mention the means to eternal life or Yosha's role in it. He just skips right over it. Not a word about Pesach, not a word about matzah. Doesn't even mention Bikurim. I mean, that is so preposterous, so egregious. that it pains me that over 2 billion people today are beguiled by this buffoon. Shame on you. And God didn't raise him from the dead. If you read what was written about him in Mizmor 22 and 88 and Yashayah 53, his soul did not die. His soul was not extinguished. His soul went into Matzah. His soul was reunited with the Spirit. God did not die because the Spirit of God separated him from him before the conclusion of Pesach. And to raise someone bodily from the dead is irresponsible and counterproductive. It's just ridiculous. You know, once you are liberated as soul and spirit and empowered as soul and spirit, to reanimate a body is to degrade all that has been done for you. We're not going to have physical bodies in heaven. Bikurim is all about the empowerment that comes along with being adopted into Yahweh's family. You know, the post-Bikurim Yosha wasn't recognized by anyone, so he could not have been raised from the dead. The women in his life, his own mother didn't recognize him. When he met the fellows on the road to Emmaus that had followed him all this time, they didn't recognize him. When he transported from Emmaus and having dinner into the upper room with the disciples, he walked through the wall. And there they did not recognize him. The only common denominator in post-Bikurim sightings is that he was not recognized. If he is not recognized, he has not been bodily resurrected. It is that simple.
May I suggest something? Remember the Nicodemus story? We did it 2 or 3 programs one time, a long time ago. And it's very obviously, let's just do it from the Christian perspective. This is Jesus talking to them. And he tells them through this story, there's these 3 options that when your body dies, your soul dies with it. The only way that soul can be animated would have to be with a spirit. And you have 2 choices.
Correct.
You can either be with Yahweh's set-apart spirit, the Ruach Kodesh, or you could be with the spirit of Satan. And it's the only life option you have.
That is correct.
Nothing in there is about a body. The body is going to dissipate and decay and go away. And like you point out with the Pesach lamb, as we all know, that's why we go through this routine to celebrate that. Every Pesach, we cook the lamb and we take the scraps left over and the bones and stuff we cannot digest, and we burn it up on the grill, just symbolically to celebrate this wonderful event. So they know
the body's gone. The body's gone.
Yeah, the preachers know everything I just said.
Everything. Yeah.
You can't miss it. So they just openly lie, as he did here, because they love Paul. So get walk away from this crap. Power. Yeah.
Yeah, that lie gives them power.
God, that's awful.
Yosha did die, and his physical body, which was the Pesach lamb, suffered that indignity, but not his soul. His soul, Yahweh's nefesh, went on to fulfill Bikurim after enabling the promises of Matzah. Then his body, as the Passover lamb, as you just said, was destroyed shortly after being placed in the tomb by Yahweh in concert with his Torah instructions. It could not have been raised since it no longer existed. And if it existed, then he is in breach of the Torah, and he's not sinless anymore.
He ain't the Passover lamb. No, exactly.
That's right.
He ain't the Passover lamb.
Blemished. And for many days he was seen by those who had traveled with him from Galilee to Jerusalem. They are now his witnesses to our people.
I beg your pardon?
So the disciples, the 12 individuals that Yosha picked, they're now relegated to travelers. The term disciple means those who learn. Those who were taught by Yosha are now relegated to travelers. so that, of course, Paul can be the big-time apostle. No, just travelers. Traveled with him from Galilee to Jerusalem. They are now his witnesses to our people. First of all, who is our people? If you're speaking to, are you speaking to Jews or are you speaking to Gentiles?
That's
a huge
question.
difference, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, who is the witness to Yisrael and Yehuda?
Dowd.
Dowd, yeah. Moshe,
and these
yeah.
and his followers.
Samuel,
everybody,
yeah.
all the 40
Yahshua,
prophets are very good.
Yirmiyah,
That's why he says go. Yes, all of them.
yeah. Micaiah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Hosea. A lot of really important individuals who are the witnesses of Yahweh, yeah.
Yeah.
To
we need some more witnesses?
Yisrael. But
we have nothing that
they're not,
wrote, or the disciples wrote. So,
right. Those are the witnesses. You want to witness to Yosha? Read the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. You want the most important, most accurate, most complete eyewitness account of what Yosha said and did.
Mm-hmm.
Read Mizmor 22 and 88 that were written by Dowd. That's where it is. Of extreme relevance, Paul is errantly and deliberately positioning Jews such that they would be seen as responsible for killing the Christian God. His words have haunted them for the past 2,000 years, leading directly to their annihilation throughout the Roman, Catholic, and Christian Europe. Not only does that infamous distinction belong to Rome, and thus to Roman Catholicism, had the Jews been able to kill the Christian God, as I've said many times before, the Christians ought to have worshipped the Jews. Moreover, how pathetic does your God have to be such that he can be killed by men who have no authority to kill? How pathetic does your God have to be such that he can be killed by men who have no authority to kill? And oh, by the way, don't Christians know that Jesus was a Yahudem, that he was Jewish?
Sometimes I think they don't.
I'm confident they don't.
I'm just going, are you nuts? Of course, yeah.
Religious myths die hard, so let's be blunt. Crucifixion was a widely used, torturous, and public form of execution developed by Rome to suppress rebellion. If you want to see it in grand scale, well documented, consider Spartacus.
Mm-hmm.
He and his fellow slaves were all crucified. Had the Jews killed Jesus, they would have stoned him.
Mm-hmm. That's the point. Yeah, good point.
Yep. Now, I don't see a whole lot of churches up there with stones against the wall, do you?
Nope. No. Funny.
No. Then you got tortured God on a Roman stick. As I mentioned before, Paul makes no mention of Yosha being the Lamb of God, as is the case with Yahshua. And unlike Dowd, Paul completely ignores what occurred on the Shabbat of Matzah. Further, Paul fails to mention the single most relevant fact. No one recognized the transfigured Yosha. They couldn't be eyewitnesses because their eyes did not recognize him, which means that he was not bodily resurrected. And yet, in stating that he was seen by those who traveled with him, which was intended to be a slight to these men's appointment as disciples, learners, Paul is unable to admit the obvious, that Yosha came to the women in his life and his disciples, but not to him. further, Paul would subsequently attack and condemn every eyewitness, especially the 3 disciples with whom Yahusha was closest.
Isn't that a relevant question, though? That Paul was there.
Yes.
He was in Jerusalem at the time, and
yes, he
no
was,
one
by
approached
his own
him,
admission.
And Yahusha didn't. And Yahusha didn't approach him. Don't you think he would have approached him instead of having to beat him up somewhere in Damascus to get his attention? You would think he knew where Yahweh obviously knew where Moshe was when he wanted him.
You know, the Olivet Discourse, which may have elements that are truthful in it, mainly because that was one of the things actually written by the disciple Lowy in the book called According to Hebrew. It says that, you know, there are those who are going to claim that they have seen the Christ. Don't believe them. Don't believe them. What did Paul claim?
He had seen him.
Saw him in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
He made it really clear. I am not going to be seen by anyone.
Until everyone sees me.
Until everyone sees me. And when everyone sees me, they're going to see the totality from whom he came. Yahweh.
Yeah.
They're going to see Yahweh saves. It's just stunning. We tell you the good news. That's the basis for gospel.
Mm-hmm.
What God promised our ancestors, he has fulfilled for us, their children, by raising up Jesus. As it is written in the 2nd Psalm, "You are my son today, I have become your father." You piece of crap liar. No. That is not who is referred to in the 2nd Psalm, which, by the way, was written by Dowd. And so you, in the book and the Psalm authored by Dowd, is Dowd. And Yahweh is his father. But, by the way, what God promised our ancestors, now he's speaking as a Jew here, Christians.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Jew. Yeah. Even though he wants to condemn all Jews, he's a Jew. Why are you believing those dastardly Jews? If all Jews are conspirators, why would you believe one?
Why you believe in him? Yeah.
You know, why you believe in your Jesus? He's a Jew too. He has fulfilled for us.
God.
No, he didn't fulfill any of it for Paul.
Yeah.
By raising up Jesus. There is not a single reference to God raising Jesus, to God raising Yahusha, to God raising the Messiah, to God raising his son. And this goes in, "You are my son." There is not a single reference to God raising his son, although he will participate in the second coming of his son, but his son is Dowd. None of this was written, and therefore it could not have been fulfilled, and it most certainly wasn't written about in the 2nd Psalm, the 2nd Mizmor. "You are my son, today I have become your father." As if that is the fulfillment of the good news that was promised and fulfilled for us, their children, by raising up Jesus. Can you tell me how raising up Jesus is fulfilled with the statement, "You are my son, today I have become your father"? And by the way, when, if you're going to believe the Christian New Testament, when did God say, "You are my son, I am pleased"? Wasn't that back there in the Yahweh Conrad account? Right. Wasn't that back there in the Yahweh Conrad account? Wasn't that 3 years before this?
Yes.
So it says, "Today I have become your father." Wait a minute. We're now talking about the day of Bikurim, of resurrection, Christian resurrection, that was 3 years later. How could it be today? If you're even going to believe the Christian New Testament, which you shouldn't.
No.
It says, today I have become your father. He claimed, according to the Christian New Testament, to be the father 3 years earlier, and did not say anything of the sort on this day, according to your own text.
33 years ago, he said, today is a child is born and a son is given to you.
Right.
So they just play us for fools, and they did for a long time, didn't they?
They did.
God.
There was no promise to raise up Jesus. There wasn't even a promise to raise up Yosha. There could not have been a promise to raise up the Passover lamb either, because it would have been inconsistent with the Torah's instructions. The Passover lamb isn't raised. The Passover lamb is sacrificed. The purpose of the sacrifice of the Passover lamb isn't so that the Passover lamb can live. Is it so that those of us who avail ourselves of the promises associated with the Passover lamb can live? I mean, what in the world are you thinking, Paul? It isn't so that the Passover lamb can live. There isn't a single Passover where the Passover lamb is resurrected. I mean, when the children of Israel were experiencing the first Passover, and he said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to bring the lamb into the home, and I want you to be there 4 days before the event, and then this is the way I want this whole thing to occur, and then I want you to be nourished by it, and as you're being nourished by the lamb, I want to make certain that everything that's left over that's not edible, that you incinerate that night. Is there any hint in there that the Passover lamb is going to be bodily resurrected? Little hopies.
No.
I'm back.
No.
I'm back.
No.
That'd be great. I'm back. No. I mean, how could you be so stupid, Christians? I mean, is Christianity a curse that renders its victims incapable of being rational?
Obviously. It's a plague.
It is a plague of death. There was never a promise to raise up the Passover lamb, because it would have been inconsistent with not only the Torah's instructions, but just reality. The fact is, Yosha's body was not raised. His soul was sent to Sheol and then released. As for Paul's evidence of such a claim, his statement is wrongly cited and errantly attributed to the second psalm. Both mistakes drive right to the heart of the matter, proving Yahweh's point that Paul sought to degrade and nullify Dowd. That is the second most serious crime ever perpetrated. Now, I call it the second most serious crime. I think Yahweh views the degradation of Dowd and attributing Dowd's promises to the Christian God as the single greatest crime ever perpetrated by humanity, because the diminishment of Yahweh's name, the negation of Yahweh's name, is mentioned a handful of times. This degradation of Dowd and of wrongly attributing the promises that Yahweh made to Dowd, the titles that he bequeathed to Dowd, the role Dowd plays, the lyrics and psalms and proverbs of Dowd, and giving all of it to the Christian Jesus to give credibility to this Gentile religion, is mentioned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So this could well be the single greatest crime ever perpetrated on humanity, is the transfer of promises from Dowd to the Christian Jesus. Well, here is in context. Dowd wrote the following in the second Mizmor. I myself have offered leadership by pouring out guidance providing counsel through my governance upon Zion, the signs posted along the way, my set-apart mountain. 2:6. I will choose to account for, proclaiming and writing, the prescription of living of the Almighty, which Yahweh said to me, you are my son. This day I bring you forth as your father.
And who's the one writing this? Dowd, right?
Not only is Dowd the one writing this, I will choose to account for, proclaiming and writing, the prescription for living of the Almighty, which Yahweh said to me. Guess what part of the context that Paul left out? I will choose to account for, proclaiming and writing, the prescription for living of the Almighty, which Yahweh said to me.
No, he leaves all that out.
Yes, you are my son. This day I will bring you forth as your father. Feel free to ask questions about this, seeking to learn the answers, because literally out of me and from me there will be an inherited share of the land of the Gentile nations, which will be given to you and unto successive generations, even unto the distant reaches of the earth, with the material realm becoming your property. Mizmor, lyrics to be sung, Song 2:8. There are two profound insights here.
Yeah.
First of all, Dowd proclaimed in writing the prescription for living. You want to know how to live? What you want is for Yahweh to say to you what he said to Dowd. You are my son. This day I bring you forth as your father. That is the prescription for living of the Almighty. That is the prescription that Dowd proclaimed. That is what it means to be part of the covenant. That is what is so profound here, that this is Dowd inspired on behalf of Yahweh to proclaim the ultimate prescription for living. And that is for Yahweh to say, you are my son. This day I bring you forth as your father. That's the covenant. That's all God wants. That's all we should want. And it was all missed.
Enough. Yeah.
Feel free to ask questions about this, seeking to learn the answers, because literally out of me and from me, what? There is an inherited share of the land of the Gentile nations that will be given to you into successive generations.
Which is the opposite
claiming
of
the
Paul.
opposite, that every promise given to the Jews is being given to the Gentiles. God is saying, no. It's the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Every claim the Gentiles have, everything they have is being given to you,
It's
Israel.
void. Yeah.
It is the opposite. If you just read this in context, Christians, you would know that he's speaking to Dowd. And you would know that replacement theology is a farce. That it's you who are going to have everything taken from you, including your life. And that Israel will inherit it all.
Context is so inconvenient.
It is,
doesn't
isn't
tell
it?
me what I want to hear.
Yes, you can go invade countries like we did
hear.
Afghanistan and Iraq if you take things out of context. And Libya. And Syria. It's amazing what you can do when you take things out of context. That's what Paul was best at. Every citation he took out of context. In this, he took, you are my son, today I have become your father, out of context of something extraordinarily profound, all of which destroyed not only Paul's credibility, but all of the credibility of every Gentile religion, especially Christianity, destroying replacement theology. I myself have offered leadership by pouring out guidance, providing counsel through my governance upon Zion, my set apart mountain. I will choose to account for proclaiming in writing the prescription of living of the Almighty, which Yahweh said to me, you are my son. This day I bring you forth as your father. Feel free to ask questions about this, seeking to learn the answers, because literally out of me and from me there will be an inherited share of the land of the Gentile nations that will be given to you and unto successive generations, even to the distant reaches of the earth, with the material realm becoming your property. Paul's a really crappy liar. This is obviously, undeniably, unequivocally said of Dowd, not Yosha. Further, it says nothing about bodily resurrection. It didn't even speak to his point, even if he had quoted it correctly, which he didn't, even if he hadn't removed it from context, which he did, even if it didn't say the opposite, which it does. There's nothing here about bodily resurrection. I mean, he couldn't find anything in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms about bodily resurrection, so
just make up one.
I just want to make up one. Yeah, there's no story in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms about bodily resurrection. None.
What? It can't be.
So I'm just going to make up one. But the one he made up completely disproves the point he's making. How is it that Christians can't see the obvious? Why are you so blind?
This is so devastating to Christianity. Wow. If they would read it.
It's this turn of phrase of wrongly attributing the things of Dowd to Jesus that has cost billions of Christians their souls. The questions are, why lie and why believe him? For those keeping count, that's 21 errors of facts and 14 intentional lies, with 3 of these grossly misrepresenting Yahweh's testimony. God does not take kindly to such dishonesty, especially regarding those who deliberately deceive by twisting his words such that he is made to appear untrustworthy regarding his son. Now, if I may, we are so corrupted by political correctness and religious mythology that someone who would expose the obvious distortions, corruptions, and outright lies that have formed the basis of religions like Christianity is considered hateful, ignorant, bigoted, out of touch with modern society and sensibilities, someone who should be ostracized. And yet there is no one more compassionate. There's no one with more character than those who are committed to examining the evidence, considering it rationally, and exposing that which misleads, which distorts, such that people can be freed from man's deliberate and erroneous schemes which lead to death and destruction. It isn't compassionate to knowingly allow billions of people to die, billions of people to be misled. In fact, it's the opposite of compassion. It shows no empathy at all. You know, Asperger's is a condition for people without empathy. Narcissism and psychosis, those individuals who suffer from these kind of psychological disorders have no empathy. And quite clearly, if you're going to promote a message that we should just all accept everything and be multicultural and let people believe what they wish to believe, and if you don't care enough to offer people the opportunity to free themselves from something which is clearly deceitful and deadly, then you have no empathy. You have no compassion. The opposite of what society would say about such people is actually true. This is a brazen revelation of Paul's villainy. It is, as it blatantly states, that God disavowed his solemn oath and promise to Dowd. Let's read it. God raised him from the dead so that he will never be subject to decay. As God said, I will give you the holy and sure blessings promised to David. This is replacement theology, folks. This is the essence of it. Everything that God said about the actual Messiah, Dowd. Everything that God said about his beloved son, Dowd. Everything that God said about the shepherd that he chose for his people, Dowd. Everything that God said about the king that he chose to lead his people, Dowd. Everything he said about the branch. Everything he said about the Zeroah, the protective and strong arm that shepherds the people. Everything he said about his chosen one. Everything he said about his firstborn, the Bakur. Everything that he offered Dowd and inspired of Dowd so that he could conceive the Psalms and the Proverbs. Christians robbed from him, from God's beloved Son, and they offered them to the Passover lamb so as to turn the Passover lamb into a new and improved God and give him the credibility they needed to impose him on the world and worship him. The greatest crime ever perpetrated in the history of mankind. And God does not find it the least bit humorous.
I'm looking at about 15 Christian Bible translations, and they all say exactly that. Wow.
Yes. It's the greatest crime ever perpetrated. God raised him from the dead so that he will never be subject to decay. What happens to the Passover lamb?
It's void now.
It's decayed as decay can possibly be, right? Yeah. It's incinerated. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
But I mean, if
as
it
God
isn't,
said, I will give you the holy and sure blessings promised David. No, what God says is that I will give David, Dowd, the set apart and sure blessings that I promised Dowd. If I don't, you can call me a liar.
That's right. We read that last
There isn't
week.
one place that God says, nope. I'm taking everything I promised him and I'm giving it to somebody else.
Well, then he's a liar.
Well, he would be a liar. Why would you believe that he's going to save you if he says, hey, I'm going to save you, but no, really, all the promises I made to save you, I'm giving to somebody else.
Yeah. He change his mind later on that one, too.
Right.
And just keep on going.
That's like saying, hey, JB, you're a heck of a guy. I have this large estate. I'm going to give my estate to you. Oh, no, I think I changed my mind. I'm going to give it to Kirk instead. Ha, 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 ha.
Kirk, no, you're not going to change your mind tomorrow and give it to someone else.
Don't get him mad at me. I don't want his estate.
Would you go off and get a handful of new credit cards, believing that you're going to be enriched, or would you say, well, if he just did it?
I say, wait a
minute.
This is not a. No.
I don't think I want to trust this guy.
I give it back. No.
At long last, Shaul has turned his attention to Dowd. Unfortunately for Christians, what he claims God has said regarding his proposed transfer of blessings from David to Jesus never occurred, therefore annulling Shaul's entire proposition. Theologians claim that their apostle was citing Isaiah 55:3, but nothing of the kind appears in the text. As with everything else Paul used to prove replacement theology, he had to be deceitful and cunning. By removing this prophecy regarding the actual Messiah and the Son of God, Dowd, from the discussion in which it was presented, by misquoting and then misapplying it, The only thing Paul actually proved is that he is a con man who cannot be trusted. It also speaks to Paul's conceit and to his utter disdain for those he has played for fools, Christians. The 55th chapter of Yahshua opens with Yahshua speaking to us. He is openly refuting the Pauline and Catholic notions that men should seek to have their thirst quenched and to be nourished by men, and that the faithful should pay such men for what they are offering by giving them their money. Please note that everything which follows was presented under the auspices of free will. It's our choice. It's your choice. This is how it reads. Woe, everyone who thirsts, you should choose of your own accord to actually walk to the water, being led to the benefits of the relationship without monetary compensation, wanting to come while choosing to acquire grain which has been literally inspected and examined, and then crushed by choice, and decide to be genuinely nourished. Of your own accord, come without money and without compensation or fee, and acquire grain which has been inspected and examined, then crushed, and wine, and the finest and most beneficial milk. This is Yahshua, Isaiah 53:1. If people stopped paying ministers and no longer made donations to their church, they would no longer be fed lives. But as it is, the faithful are paying for their own demise.
Yeah. Boy,
we've been doing this for, we all have, in the past. We have been doing this for a long time, fellas. And yet this is the first time we have seen this succession of verbs all scribed in the call stem and imperative mood, denoting that all of this is actually and quite literally our choice. A genuine expression of our desire and ours alone. We ought not be swayed by the religious or political, no matter how popular these schemes, no matter how much the pressure. Rather than paying the devil his due, or look to men for scraps of rotten food tossed from their table, rather than leaving a donation at the church while participating in communion or the Eucharist, go directly to God instead. Unlike men, what he provides is both free and satisfying. It is ironic that the Roman Catholic Church was funded on indulgences, and that the Protestant ministers proclaim that salvation is the gift of God, and yet expect to be paid for their pronouncement. When I told the late Jerry Falwell that everything that he was saying about God was untrue, the multimillionaire televangelist agreed, but then bemoaned. If I were to reveal this publicly, those who sit in the pews of my church and make donations, and the letters which arrive each day in the mail to support my university would cease. And if you do so, they will label you a kook. As a result, Yahowah asked the religious, why do you consistently spend your money on that which is not bread, and then labor for that which is neither fulfilling nor satisfying? You should choose to listen diligently to me and actually elect to hear what I have to say, and elect to consume, being nourished by, that which is beneficial and good. And then, acting on your own initiative, unaffected by outside influences, continuously take great pleasure in the best of what is produced and offered, the most enriching and fulfilling of things. for your soul. Yeshaya, Isaiah 55:2. Why is it that people think that they make a donation to their church that God's going to favor them? Because the televangelists that receive the money, many of whom are worth tens of millions of dollars, flying around in private jets. I think there's one or two of them that are worth a couple of $100 million.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the Roman Catholic Church is worth billions.
Where a pastor, or one of these televangelist type pastors, literally pretends to die on stage and will only be resurrected when the congregation donates enough money. And so people are literally walking up there to throw money on top of him so he can be resurrected.
Maybe they can suffocate him.
The stupidity of that one just boggles my mind.
Yeah, people are just so... Religion just renders people stupid.
Yeah.
Why do you consistently spend your money on that which is not bread and then labor for that which is neither fulfilling nor satisfying? You should choose to listen diligently to me. To who's me? Yahowah, not them. And actually hear what I have to say. Listen to what God has to say and elect to consume, being nourished by that which is beneficial and good, and then acting on your own initiative, unaffected by outside influences, continuously take great pleasure in that which is produced and offered, the most enriching and fulfilling of things for your soul. How about capitalize on Pesach? How about capitalize on Matzah? How about capitalize on Bikurim and Shabbat?
Yeah.
How about capitalize on the Torah? How about be nourished by the Torah? How about capitalize on the covenant? All these things are free. It's your choice, and you can freely receive that which is good for you from Yahweh, or you can make donations to the men and institutions who are poisoning you. We should be amazed, however, by Paul's bombastic arrogance. He thinks so little of those he is deliberately misleading that he believes he can pluck out and then pervert prophetic statements from discussions which, when considered in context, completely destroy his credibility without getting caught, without being held accountable. He is wrong in every way but one. The religious he is bamboozling are universally unwilling or unable to question the basis of their faith in him, even their own scriptures, when they're shown to be invalid. We have proven that everything Paul has said has been a lie. It's in the book of Acts. And even with absolute, irrefutable evidence that what Paul said and is recorded in the book of Acts is absolutely untrue, there isn't a Christian on earth who will be swayed by the evidence.
That's amazing. They should just walk away like instantly.
Christian clerics throughout the ages, searching the Torah and prophets, have come to the conclusion that Paul was quoting Isaiah 55:3 and Acts 13:34, as I have attested. But when they discovered that it didn't read as Paul had claimed, not one sought to condemn Paul as a charlatan. Worse, when they came to realize that his citations were grossly inaccurate and totally misleading, often conveying the opposite of what the self-proclaimed apostle was claiming, no one seemed to care. There is no record of any of the church followers acknowledging the obvious, that Paul was contradicting God while claiming that he had authorized him, which is a rational impossibility. And not one exhibited the initiative to do what we are doing now, which is to consider the context of what was being revealed to determine what God actually had to say on this and every other matter. This isn't just a curiosity, but instead drives to the very heart of what's wrong with replacement theology. These spurious citations and irrational arguments explain why Paul not only started attacking and demeaning Jews, but had to turn to Gentiles to prevail. While the people to whom the Torah was given knew that Shaul was lying through his rotten teeth, Goyim, unlike Yehudim, were clueless regarding the revelation Shaul was misappropriating. Then by recasting the ungodly Goyim, his people were instructed to avoid as divine, and by recasting the chosen people as scheming genocidal liars, Paul unleashed a religious genocide against them. He could falsely claim, albeit now with his own scriptural justification, that God so hated Jews that he would disavow all of his promises to them, just as he had to Dowd. Sure, it's demeaning and preposterous, and yes, it makes God out to be an untrustworthy and petulant liar. But the Greeks and Romans lapped it up, such that
look at
they
the
believed
examples of the gods they had to follow.
Yeah, I guess it was just like
their behavior.
Yeah, sure.
No wonder they fell for it.
Consistent with Zeus and Jupiter and Bacchus and Dionysus. They were all schemers. They drank it down, poison and all, the whole conspiratorial plot that the Jews had schemed to kill God as if it were milk and honey. Yahweh stated otherwise. Incline your ear means listen to me, and walk to me. Elect to listen, and your soul shall live. I will establish an everlasting covenant for you, based upon my verifiable and established, unending love and unfailing devotion to Dowd. Let me read that again. Incline your ear. Choose to extend your ability to hear. And walk to me. Choose to move toward me. Elect to listen, and your soul shall live and be restored. I will establish an everlasting covenant, family-oriented relationship for you, based upon my verifiable and established, unending and unfailing devotion for Dowd. That is the opposite of what Paul claimed God had said. Yahweh asked us to listen to him, not Paul. This has nothing whatsoever to do with Paul or him as in Jesus, but was instead written of Dowd, for Dowd, and to us based upon that relationship with Dowd. This isn't about never being subject to decay, nor being raised from the dead, but instead about our souls continuing to live. Instead of God giving holy and sure blessings promised to David, to you, whomever you may represent, whether that be Paul, his church, Gentiles, or even his man God, as a replacement, Yahweh is affirming the establishment of an everlasting covenant for those who listen to him, based upon his verifiable and trustworthy, enduring and unfailing love for Dowd. That's why Dowd is so important. God taught him, God loved him. God anointed him.
Called
God
him
chose
out.
him. All of these things. God revealed the means that we can follow to be part of the covenant through him. It is only when we appreciate why God chose this man to make all of these promises, to offer all of these titles, to inspire to write all of these words, that we have an appreciation for what God is trying to achieve in our lives. You can't figure that out by worshiping the Passover lamb. You figure that out by studying the lyrics that Dowd wrote, by analyzing what God had to say about him. That's how you become.
Who understood it better than anyone else in all of human history.
You know, JB, you're a smart guy. But if you were to combine your intelligence, my intelligence, Kirk's intelligence, and multiply it by a billion, I'm not sure we measure up.
No.
To Dowd. Dowd was brilliant. God said of him, he's right. He figured it out. Listen, we have every tool imaginable. Dowd only had the Torah. We have the Torah, prophets, and Psalms.
He figured it out with a lot less than we have.
Yeah, you're kidding? Well, indeed.
Yes.
Wow.
And we have Dowd to help us figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
He was so far beyond us. And yet, Dowd, setting an example that we should follow, gave it all away free. Everything he learned, he shared, so that we could benefit. It's the most important story ever told. We should be singing our songs to Dowd, thanking Dowd, appreciating Dowd, learning from Dowd. But here in this very statement that Paul is using to state that everything that he had promised to Dowd, he transferred to Jesus, says exactly the opposite. That God was basing all of it on his verifiable and established, enduring, and unfailing devotion to Dowd as part of his everlasting covenant. I don't know what's more important. I mean, how can you miss this? Incline your ear and walk to me. Elect to listen, and your soul shall live. I will establish an everlasting covenant for you based upon my verifiable and established, unending and unfailing love for Dowd. What is the covenant based upon?
Terms and conditions. Joining the, accepting those and walking towards the
The covenant is based upon Yahweh's verifiable and established, unending and unfailing love for Dowd. That's what it's based upon. That is why he said, "You are my son, I am your father." That's why he
written
said,
this
"You're
way.
right."
It's written this way in the Bibles. Incline your ear and come to me. Listen to, so that your soul may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my loving devotion assured to David. I mean, if you looked up all the letters, all the words in there, you'd come to your conclusion even more better, because they tweak it, but still.
But still.
Well, how do you get? Yeah, how do you get
from what even in the English translations, they absolutely contradict what Paul claimed. So either the God of the Old Testament is a liar, or Paul's a liar.
Yeah.
Right. One of the two. Either the God of the Old Testament is an outright liar, or Paul's an outright liar. And since Paul not only misquoted him, but said exactly the opposite of what God said, it's obvious who the liar is. And you can't have it both ways. It is impossible for Yahowah, who happens to be God, and Shaul Paul to both be telling the truth. Because what they just said is the opposite of one another. And if you believe that God inspired Paul, then Paul's God's a liar, which would make Paul a liar. Paul lied. It's that simple. If you can't figure it out, shame on you. It's obvious. It's undeniable. It's irrefutable. It takes less than 15 minutes of your time to figure it out. If your soul isn't worth 15 minutes, then so be it. Good riddance. But if you are a Yisraelite listening to this, you don't need to pay any attention, and you can throw away that Christian New Testament. You don't need to pay any attention to and can discard everything that is said about the Christian Jesus. You can focus expressly on what God said and did through Dowd. That is sufficient. The entire covenant was made for Dowd. Listen, that's powerful because the covenant was conceived through Yahweh's discussions with Abraham, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The covenant was reaffirmed with Yishak and Jacob, was it not?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And yet, here God says, I created it. I based it on my verifiable and established unending love and unfailing devotion for Dowd. It's black and white.
Yeah, can't take that away
from
Dowd.
That is the opposite of what Paul claimed, God said. Yahweh asked us to listen to him, not Paul. This had nothing whatsoever to do with him as in Jesus, but it's instead written of Dowd. It wasn't about never being subject to decay, nor being raised from the dead, but instead about our souls continuing to live. Instead of God giving his holy and sure blessings promised to David, to you, whomever you may represent, exactly the opposite of that. It's just so sad. Anyway, we're still recording, but we're no longer broadcasting. It's a lot to have gone through. We've still got more to do. It's a good place to take a break. We'll pick it up this place, same place next time.
Great stuff, man. Wow.
I just like to continue to reaffirm by analyzing Paul's misquotations of Yahweh, taking them out of context and twisting them to serve his agenda, how every time he did it, his claim was the opposite of what God actually said. And how Paul's testimony, Paul's testimony about what happened was the antithesis of what happened. It could never have happened that way. I mean, typically, you have to weave in more elements of truth to make a lie credible. Paul hasn't even done that. He's treating Gentile Christians as if they're absolute idiots. If you're a Christian, he's playing you for a fool.
Well, there's no reason they kept burning all the Bibles and not letting you have one, so you never even bring it up.
Information is power.
How dare you find this?
How dare you? Yeah. All true.
Patty had that one time when she was arguing with, not arguing, but discussing with one of her sisters, and she went and grabbed, literally just a King James Bible to show them where it was. And they're like, why? What, you got to bring out the Bible? You got to have that as part of the conversation? Well, we're talking about what God said. You say this is his word. It's just, God forbid you use the evidence, the truth, what God had to say.
Well,
the irrationality of the religious people boggles the mind.
Well,
evidence and reason.
I find rather tragic that right in the heart of Jerusalem there's this building, this round building, and they got this very scroll written in the language that they can read, and it's sitting
Yep.
right there, and they don't beat the world over the head with it. I mean, how dare you accuse us of this? This is the record.
Right.
Gosh.
Yeah, Yahshua, the scroll we're
Yehuda.
reading from, it's right there. It's in entirety. Dating to 200
this
BC.
Is the one, this is the prophet everybody likes to use about Jesus.
Yes.
When I was growing up, they always said, and this talks more about Jesus than anybody. I'm going.
Yeah, well, guess what? Jesus isn't mentioned anywhere in Yahshua, Isaiah, and Dowd is.
All over the place.
All over the place.
Wow. I've already read all
and
this
by the way,
stuff, but this is still.
This is in 55.
Wow.
I mean, the one reference to the Passover lamb is in 53. This is after that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is after he's done his thing, you know.
Oh,
this is 55.
This is too.
Come
this
to
is
your
too
senses.
good, man. This is just too good.
And if you're bothered as a Christian that we're mocking the religious and we're mocking Christians, you ought not be. You ought to realize that what you have believed is so stupid, so foolish, that you ought to recognize that this is the appropriate way to deal with it. It isn't nice what you've done. It isn't rational what you've done. It isn't prudent what you've done. It's just pure evil, and you're corrupting your children with it.
Yes, you killed my entire family with it.
Right.
I take that rather personal because they won't listen now. They're so indoctrinated in this crap.
Yes. Yeah.
And I like those
and mine as well,
folks. Yeah.
And even the people that haven't accepted Christianity have rejected God because of the stupidity of Christianity.
Yeah. They base their view of God from this stupid thing. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. And if it hadn't been for the stupidity of Christianity, Islam would never have prevailed.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, religious Jews, you're equally responsible. Had you not sold Muhammad your Talmud readings, which he then bastardized to create his Quran, Islam wouldn't have fooled a fool. So we ought to be mocking the religious. Yahweh does. And if you don't want to be mocked, change.
Yeah, turn away.
Give it up. Turn away. You know, I began the first sentence of Observations for Our Time saying that hate is a virtue.
Yeah, I remember.
And explained to people why it is so. And we should despise these lies because they kill so many, they rob so many, they deprive so many of their money, their freedoms, and the lives of their very souls. Right.
Yeah, gosh.
So I don't know what we can do beyond this to get your attention. Hopefully we just shame you into the realization that you need to shed the stupidity of your religion.
Well,
hopefully.
Because of the way you write, you've laid it all out for them. Because of the introduction to God, you've got everything on how to look it up. I know they don't speak Hebrew. I don't. I couldn't go down to the grocery store and do what they're doing, but I can translate every dadgum word and come out whether this is verifiable and true or not.
Yeah, the whole book was written, all of these books, so that you could read them online for free, and you could copy and paste the word being translated into any search engine so that you could bring up 4 or 5 lexicons to verify the translations for yourself. It's all there.
Yeah.
Don't take our word on it. Verify it yourself. Yeah. And then once you find that that is actually what the words say, why wouldn't you walk away from and start to distrust those who have deliberately misled you?
Yeah.
It's the rational thing to do. But have this appreciation. We are not compelling anyone. Quite frankly, we don't care how the religious respond to this. It's everybody's individual choice. Our desire is to make the truth known. Our desire is to share how wonderful Yahweh is, how marvelous the gift he is offering is. And to appreciate even what he is asking us to do, to avail ourselves of it, even that is beneficial. We're passionate about his name, passionate about his word, passionate about what he's offering, and we want to share it so that those who want to know God, who want to engage in a relationship with him, know how. And at the same time, we're exposing and condemning the religion and political schemes of men, because until people are willing to walk away from them, they have no chance whatsoever to walk to God.
They've brought us to the brink of World War III. God, these people.
Yes.
It's all religious, political.
Yes.
God.
Yes, it is. Yeah. All right. Well, our task is finished for this evening. It was a marvelous celebration of truth prevailing over the lies, and I hope that many come to flee religion, to walk away from it, so that they can come to know Yahweh. I will tell you that I want to end with this thought. I am just finished translating Micah 5, and it's really Micaiah 5. And in so doing it, it's a prophecy in the 5th chapter that Christians attribute, as they do everything, to Jesus, and it's clearly Dowd. And so, it speaks of some things that I wanted to look up. And every site, without exception, I looked up was a Christian apologist talking about how this applies to their Messiah. And one of them was the site was named Shema Yisrael. And you just want to cry. You just want to cry.
Oh, give me a break.
And it speaks of Rabbi this and Rabbi that Rabbi this and Rabbi that had his sermons on John 10. Oh, God. You just want to make you scream.
I guess.
So there's a lot of lies out there. You have to filter through a lot of crap to find the truth. We hope those of you who are listening come to study the words of Yah, and you listen to him, inclining your ear to him, so that your soul may live. May Yah bless. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Look forward to being with you this time next week. May Yah bless you all.
Shabbat shalom. Yeah. Good night.
Shalom.
Night, JB. Night, JB.
Hey.